If your calendar emptied tomorrow and no one ever knew, would you feel relieved or would you feel invisible? Sit with that for a second. Because the answer tells you something most people spend years avoiding. You've done it before. Someone asks how you've been, and before you've even thought about it, you hear yourself say, "I've been so busy." Maybe you were, maybe you weren't, but the word came out anyway. Automatic. Like a reflex. You check your phone in public even when nothing's there. You describe your week using phrases like slammed and barely keeping up. You cancel plans and feel a strange, quiet guilt, not because you let someone down, but because part of you felt almost proud of having a reason. This isn't laziness, it's not dishonesty exactly. It's something older than that, and more interesting. Psychologists studying social behavior have found that in modern Western cultures, especially the US, busyness has shifted from a burden into a status signal. Being busy means you are wanted, needed, important. It means your time has value, and by extension, you have value. The problem is that the brain can't always tell the difference between being busy and performing busyness. So it does both, often at the same time. You check your email not because you expect something important, but because it feels like what an important person does. You volunteer for the extra project not because you want to, but because saying yes feels safer than the question that saying no might invite, which is, so what are you doing instead? There's a term in social psychology called conspicuous busyness. It's the act of making your workload visible to others, not to manage it, but to signal worth. And research suggests people in cultures that prize individual productivity are particularly vulnerable to it because their self-concept gets tangled up with their output. When you stop producing, you feel like you stop existing in the eyes of others. And that fear, the fear of being perceived as idle, as ordinary, as not quite necessary, is quietly running a lot of your decisions. Here's what makes this complicated. The busyness isn't always fake. You probably are tired. You probably do have a lot going on. But underneath the schedule, there's often a deeper exhaustion, the kind that comes from constantly managing how you appear to others. The mental labor of performing a version of yourself that justifies your presence in the room. What you're protecting yourself from isn't a slow week. It's the moment someone sees you without the busy signal running and decides you're less than they thought. That's not a scheduling problem. That's a worth problem. And no amount of tasks on your to-do list will solve it. The shift starts with a simple and uncomfortable habit, telling the truth about your time, not to everyone, just to yourself. Not "I've been slammed" when you've mostly been anxious. Not so much going on when most of it is noise you created to feel necessary. Try, just once, saying, "Things have been quiet." Notice the reflex. Notice the small internal alarm that fires. That alarm is the thing worth examining, not because you need to silence it immediately, but because now you know it's there. People who are genuinely comfortable with their own worth don't need their calendar to prove it, and they're usually the ones who end up doing work that actually matters, not because they're busier, but because they've stopped confusing motion with meaning. So go back to the original question. If your calendar emptied tomorrow and no one ever knew, what would you feel? If the answer is anything other than relief, that's the thing to pay attention to, not the calendar, not the schedule, the fear underneath it. That's where the real work is.